Hey everybody, Pastor Greg here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are, I know it is good as we are co-creating this moment together. On behalf of myself and Pastor Yolanda, I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you for watching and supporting CSC. If you have a prayer request, you can send us an email. Send an email to prayerchampions@celebrationsc.org and we will hold and know the truth with you. If you'd like to give to CSC and support us financially, you can go to our website, www.celebrationsc.org, and click Give. Remember, give what amount that feels good, not the amount that you think you should give, because it's out of the good feeling vibration that you will receive the blessings and the benefits of giving. We are already in a powerful series. I hope you watched last week's message. If you haven't, you can go back to that. But today we're going to get into the next message. Let's get into it.
So we're going to dig in because we have a few things to cover today. As I like to do, I always review where we were last week. We're dealing with this awesome symbolism of spring, this time that we're in. And last week I started with the message, you are the living mystery. And we went to the book of Ezekiel, the story of Ezekiel in the valley with the dry bones. And I talked about how that is an allegory for the path of the sun coming out of the valley, coming out of the southern hemisphere, coming back up to spring to give birth to light. And of course this then reflects and represents how our ideas come from a thought into form. And so when the question of this conversation happens within Ezekiel's mind, can you take something that seems to be lifeless, like a seed that is dry? Can you take something that seems to be nothing, and from the valley, can you actually speak life to it and bring it into being? Yes, we do it all the time. Right. This is how we bring thoughts into things. Please go back to that message if you didn't hear it. But we're going to move forward. Because, of course, today is Palm Sunday, and tomorrow is the beginning of Passover. Now, I encourage you to go back to YouTube. We shared a message about 3 years ago, actually. Now you've crossed the line, where I deal directly with the beautiful symbolism of Passover and what the Exodus story is really all about. And we speak to it from a metaphysical point of view and dealing with the allegory and the symbolism of the story. Not as a literal story about people who actually walk the earth, but actually about a path that is we're always experiencing as we go through this cycle with the sun. I encourage you to check that out. But I want to talk more about Palm Sunday because that's what we're in today. And it's interesting because, of course, the Jesus story is a symbolic story. And so we always look at it from that perspective. And so today is the day where Christians all over the planet are going to be celebrating this moment of Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem. And it's said that he chose to enter Jerusalem on a donkey. He asked to have a donkey and a colt. And so he's sitting on the donkey, and then a colt is holding his and some of the disciples' belongings. And there's a interpretation of that that says that the reason that Jesus, who's considered the King of Kings by many, the reason why the king would choose to enter Jerusalem on a donkey is to show humility, right? And that's a nice interpretation, and that's a first level interpretation to understand the story. But what we recognize is that when we start to look at the symbolism in Scripture, and this takes us back to the understanding that we get from Kabbalah, the reason why it's said that you can't actually learn the deeper mysteries until you're 40 is because you have to first learn the outer mysteries. First just learn the who, what, when, and where of the stories. And so you get some symbolic meaning that feels good, but it's actually not the whole meaning. And so what we do here at CSC is we drop down a few levels beyond this surface idea. In this case, that Jesus was demonstrating his humility by riding on a donkey. That's not what it meant. Now, why do I say that? Well, first we have to look at the fact that the Jesus story, this story of a man with 12 disciples who is killed and then resurrects, is not a new story. Right? We have Attis, we have Mithras, we have Osiris, we have Dionysus, or the Roman version is Hephaestus. But what's interesting about the Dionysus story is we get the donkey again with Dionysus. Not only do we get the donkey again, but the celebration of Dionysus at this time is the celebration where you have him riding in on a donkey and there are people throwing palms celebrating him, just like in the Jesus story. So this brings us to the idea that we have to look at and ask a question and say, well, there must be some symbolism about this triumphant entry and the fact that it was a donkey, we have to look at what that symbolism is, because maybe it tells us something about ourselves and about our lives. And so there's a book that I highly recommend. I've been studying it and using it for many, many years. There's authors by the name of Tim Freak and Peter Gandy. And their first New York Times bestseller is The Jesus Mysteries. And then the second book that they released is Jesus and the Lost Goddess. I recommend both of those. If you really want to dig into understanding the mythological and allegorical roots of this Jesus story and how it has shown up across generations, across this planet over and over again, you should go there. And here in the Jesus Mysteries, they write this: to the ancients, the donkey typified lust, cruelty, and wickedness. It symbolically represented the lower animal self, which must be overcome and subdued by an initiate of the mysteries. And so what's being depicted there as Jesus is triumphantly walking into Jerusalem, it is us, because the Christ is us. It's our highest self that has now conquered all of those things that would keep us from living our greatest life, from being great on the planet. It is also, many times with the ancients, animals were used to represent certain emotions. So we can look at Jesus having mastered his emotions, and that is why he is walking into Jerusalem triumphant, and the world is celebrating him, saying, Hosanna, Hosanna, because the world wants to celebrate us in the same way. When we master our emotional self, make it the donkey, we sit on it, but unfortunately many times the donkey is sitting on us, riding us into Jerusalem. Now, it's so interesting with this story of, just to give you a little bit more about this idea of the donkey, there's a story by Lucius Apelles. It's called The Golden Ass. And it was written as a mythological story. We've probably heard versions of this story, where man is, because he's so overtaken by his emotions and all of the things that are controlling him, not his highest self, he turns into a donkey. And so then he has to go through a series of lessons where he can now conquer that lower self. Once he actually conquers his lower self, then he becomes a man again. But now he's complete in himself and he knows who he is. And so in that tale, he meets Isis. And Isis says this to him. Isis says that the donkey is the most hateful to her of all beasts. Now symbolically, why would Isis say that? Well, because according to the Kemetic and Egyptian tradition, we understand that the donkey is considered the sacred animal of Set. Set represents the lower nature, and Set is who killed Osiris. Osiris is the Christ figure in the Isis and Osiris story, right? Osiris dies and resurrects as the highest self, as the Christ, if you will. And so, again, that was another clue that we recognize that the donkey, or this golden ass in the case of the story, represents, as Tim Freak and Peter Gandy say later, the figure of the God-man riding in triumph on a donkey symbolized that he was a master of his lower animal nature. So that's what Palm Sunday is about, right? Now that we've gotten that out of the way, right? The question for me is, okay, this is wonderful, Jesus. You're awesome. You mastered your lower nature, and you walked through Jerusalem, and people hailed you. That's wonderful, Jesus, but how do I do that? What about me, right? And so when I thought about that, it took me to the teachings of Abraham Hicks, because I think that Abraham teaches us one of the best ways to understand our emotions, and then ultimately to use our emotions to our benefit, because emotions aren't bad. But when our emotions run our lives, that's when they appear bad. But when we recognize that our emotions are, as Abraham Hicks would say, our emotional guidance system, that is our communication with our highest self, then we can use it in a more powerful way. So there's this story about Esther that Abraham tells. Esther was at a hotel and she was happy to be there and she was ready to take a bath. And so the indicator said that if you turn the knob to the right, you get hot water. You turn it to the left, you get cold water. Well, she quickly found out that that wasn't true. And so when she turned it to the hot side, she actually got cold water, right? And so immediately, of course, as any of us would do, if you turned it and cold water came out of the hot side, you would turn it to the other side. You'd be like, oh, okay, hot water, cool. You would move on and take your bath, right? And so Esther says, she thought, I'm glad I'm wise enough to take a hot bath anyway. That's right here, right? In other words, she could feel which was hot and which was cold. She really did not need the sign, and it was fortunate because the sign was incorrect. And we're wanting you to understand that often you're reading some sign that is outside of you, that somebody else has placed, and you're trying to follow that guidance, which is based upon something that has nothing to do with you. And then you wonder why you're taking a cold bath. And we say, if you're paying attention to the way you feel, you're always moving toward what you are wanting. You have to decide that it is not as important to you what anybody else thinks. Because when you care more about what they think than you do about how you feel, then you'll follow the sign that says hot this way, and you'll have a very cold bath. And then you'll resent the guy who put the sign on wrong. Then you'll want to go back and get to the bottom of it. You'll need to write notes to the hotel. I wanted a hot bath, but the sign said hot was that way, and I've always been obedient. I always do what I'm told to. My mother taught me that, and so I want to know, I want you to know I had a miserable, miserable bath. And it's your fault, because I always do what I'm told, and I didn't like the way it turned out at all. And even though I sensed that if I turned it the other way, it would have been more comfortable, I've been taught not to pay any attention to my own resources of understanding. Because after all, I'm but a humble human. And I'm sure someone connected to God put that sign on the faucet. Someone who really knew better than me. And so what's interesting is that our emotions are our indicator. Just like we can feel if the water is hot or cold, our emotions are the way we can feel whether we are moving toward that thing that we want, that life that we want, that money, that house, that car that we want, or whether we're actually turned the other way. And the thing about our emotions, as Abraham teaches us, is we have this emotional guidance system. What happens is emotions, we can have a whole category of emotions. If you look at the scale of emotions, if you read in Ask It and It's Given, or in the Astonishing Power of Emotions, Abraham quantifies about 1 to 22 different emotions, right, along the scale. But what we understand is that at the end of the day, one feels good and one doesn't, right? We know what emotions feel good when we feel good, and we know when we don't, right? And that is our communication with our highest self, with our God self. Because what's happening, and Abraham writes this in The Astonishing Power of Emotions, what's happening is that everything that you are living is about your physical and non-physical points of view and how they interplay with another. So I don't know if you know this, and this is good news. There's a non-physical you that's safe, happy, and well that exists right now, in addition to the physical you that's out here playing in the world. It's similar to, and this is one of my favorite ways to look at it, it's similar to a character in a video game, in the screen, having its life and experiencing all kinds of wonderful things in the video game, and you, the non-physical self, that is controlling it, and you know that if your character falls down a ditch, you're not hurt, right? You know if your character dies, you press reset and you can start all over again. You're not worried about any of those things, right? Well, similarly, there's a non-physical you that has its hands on the game control. And how do we communicate with that non-physical us? Through our emotions. It's always sending us information. If we make a turn, or we try to do this thing, or try to speak to that person, or don't do this thing, or don't do that thing, through our emotions, we receive the communication. When we feel good and it feels good, it moves us into all is well at baseline. When we talk about feeling good, it's not ecstatic and rah, 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 and oh, I'm through the roof, fireworks are going off. It doesn't have to be that, right? And that's important, because I think many times that's what some people think. It's like, well, if I'm not feeling the adrenaline rush of having been on a roller coaster, then I don't have I'm not feeling the good emotions, right? Just the all is well, right? The absence of doubt, worry, and fear, right? When we're feeling those emotions, then we know that we're in alignment with our inner being. That's another term that Abraham uses. Or if you want to use the term God, use the term God. But the reason why that's the last word that I'm using today is because what I want us to understand is that God is you. The non-physical part of you, that is God, but it is you. Now, a way that we can understand this from science, in quantum theory, there's the idea of a quantum field, or it's called consciousness, right? And actually, we know in science that all of the laws of science come out of this one unified field. Science has already proven that. Even mathematically, it's proven that there is a formula, there's an equation that is always in operation, that is constantly giving of itself and giving back to itself, and giving of itself and giving back to itself, and it's self-perpetuating. In the Bible, we have the interpretation or the meaning of the word Yahweh as the self-existing one. That which self-exists, it gives of itself and replenishes its own self. It never gives up itself. That's what consciousness is, the quantum field. And so what we recognize, what happens then, is that the experience of life is any probability that bursts out of this field. That's all of us. That's why I say we're God's good idea. It had a thought, it had a desire to experience life in a specific, unique way, and so you came into being. But because it's self-existing, because it never loses anything, that means that that connection between you and all of consciousness still is. Yes. And that's your inner being. That's your non-physical self. Call it God, your God self, your highest self, your source, the Christ in you, your Buddha nature, the oversoul. We can go on and on, right? But recognize that it exists and that you're connected to it and how to communicate with it. And so when we recognize that, then we have that communication. The question comes to me, well, then how can we increase our awareness of that? Because on one level, I'm sure many of you are saying, okay, Pastor Greg, I get it, and many of you, you've read this already, right? So you understand this to be true, but as life moves in real time, it's like, yeah, but I don't pay attention to it, or it's not that easy, Pastor Greg, when I want to cuss out my coworker. Right? It's not that easy. So I want to talk about a few hows, and we're going to use a couple of the processes from Abraham. But the first thing, the how, is meditation. And we already talked about meditation and transcendental meditation. But what's interesting is that aside from that technique, what we're finding through research is that what begins to happen through meditation, and you can start very simply, sitting for 5 minutes and just counting your breath, right? It's one of the easiest meditations you can do, right? No more than 5 minutes. I mean, that's where I started. For me, I actually came to meditation because of the stress of going through a divorce, and I needed something, and I said, help, and Source brought me to meditation, right? And so I started very simply with just 5 minutes every day. And I found just a little bit of peace. But what's interesting, what research is showing us now is that what begins to happen through meditation is that we're aware of the monkey mind, right? The amygdala. Interesting that we call it the monkey mind. This takes us back to the idea of we use animals to describe emotions, right? The amygdala, what begins to happen, the reason why we get triggered and then respond to life from that fight or flight place is because we've lost the connection between our frontal cortex and the amygdala. And so what happens in meditation, and again research is showing this, that bond between the prefrontal cortex, which Bob Roth calls the CEO of the mind. And so imagine if you don't have connection to the CEO. Imagine a company that didn't hear from the CEO, or what would happen to that company? The CEO is the one that makes decisions. The CEO is the one that holds the vision and maintains the vision for the company. But that communication is severed. Well, what happens through meditation, you strengthen that bond between the CEO of the mind and the fearful fight or flight part of our mind, right? And so when you strengthen that connection, what begins to happen is it's like a parent. When a child is scared at night because they think with the door open, they think a monster is going to come through, and the parent comes in and says, oh no, everything's fine. They turn on the light, see, it's just your clothes, right? And then the kid is okay, right? And they can fall asleep. Well, that's what the prefrontal cortex does for us when we have that connection. But when we don't have that connection, immediately we just respond. Or react, rather, instead of respond. And so through meditation, we begin to strengthen that bond. And it's still incredibly fascinating to me in my own life when I can witness myself, okay, Greg, you can choose to cuss, you can choose to love. But I can see it in that moment, like I really have two choices. Because for so often, until we get to that place, we don't think that we're choosing, right?
Yes.
Right? We don't think that we're choosing. It doesn't feel like that because the amygdala is the only thing that's talking and it's firing first. Now notice the amygdala is important, right? If you were in the middle of a street and a car is rushing to you, the amygdala is the thing that pops in, gives you the adrenaline rush, and you run. And that's what it's supposed to do. But you're not supposed to run in every situation. So all of a sudden, you begin to have this beautiful ability to choose. I love hearing about students who are learning meditation. And one of the things that I've heard consistently through many students that learn meditation, many times they would get in fights all the time and they would get suspended. And you hear them over and over again, yeah, I realized I didn't have to do that anymore. Yeah, I still get angry, but then I just stop and realize, oh, I don't have to do that. Or they realize what the repercussions of that is. Students who were randomly always the bad kids, considered the bad kids, right? All of a sudden, what happens after meditation? Their grades go up, right? Their absenteeism goes down. Their health improves. Meditation. Now, with meditation, I also add meditation and yoga. Now, what's interesting, meditation and yoga, they serve the same purpose and really should go together. And I got to talk about this a little bit. When we say yoga, we all think of doing postures on our yoga mat, right? But in truth, yoga is an 8-limb system.
Yes.
And yoga means union. Now, what I love with Abraham Hicks is always teaching us how to come back into alignment. Alignment, union. Similar words. Right? And actually alignment is used all the time. Yoga teachers are always thinking about that, right? And helping us to adjust our postures related to alignment. And so the beauty of yoga, the purpose of yoga is actually to then allow us to get the body out of the way so that then we can feel this eternal now and feel this eternal connection, this eternal union that we have. And so what begins to happen, although many don't realize it, they go to yoga to look good. But all of a sudden, many yogis tell the same story that all of a sudden I feel more present and I realize that I can choose calm or I can choose fear. Because the purpose of yoga and the purpose of meditation, which is a part of yoga, the system, is for us to be able to go out and live our lives victoriously.
Yes.
The purpose of meditation is not to be deep and spiritual. The purpose of yoga is not to be deep spiritual or have an awesome body. It's not the purpose. I mean, it's even interesting if you look at and read the Yoga Sutras, right? Asana, the word, which is the word, the Sanskrit word for postures, it's only mentioned once in the Yoga Sutras. One big old spiritual book. And the thing that we think yoga is only mentioned once, that word. Right? But the asanas are part of it because what happens is we again, recognizing that we have a physical self that's connected to a non-physical self, through doing these postures, we get this physical self out of the way to get back connected to, oh, I'm more than this. Oh, I have this larger connection. So those are two very easy ways that you can start. Because what begins to happen through disciplined practice, regular practice, right? Willingness, all of a sudden you realize that you have a choice. And you realize that you actually are the master of your emotions. All of a sudden you can tell that donkey to get off your back. And then you sit on the donkey and ride through life. Abraham offers several processes, and the book Asking It is given, and if you don't have the book, I encourage you to get it. The second part of the book, it's 22 processes. And what I love to say is the 23rd process is affirmative prayer. Right? One of the processes I love, and it's something that I talk about all the time, is pivoting, as it's named by Abraham. Pivoting simply means that When we're in an emotional place, something just happened, right? Something that made us angry, something that made us sad, something that put us in fear, right? Whatever it may be, put us in despair, put us in depression, made us anxious. We can ask ourselves a question. Okay, I'm feeling this feeling, and I know that emotions are just my communication. And I'm not feeling a good emotion, which means that my higher self is telling me, you're not in alignment right now, Greg. Okay, so I know what I don't want. Now what do I want? Pivot. Turn your attention from what you don't want to now what do you want? Okay? You can do that in your head if you like. My suggestion is to write it down. At that point, you're in the feeling. You're in the emotional feeling. You don't even have to quantify what it is that you don't want at that moment. But you can begin to start writing what you want. Many of you may have heard Pastor Yolanda. She's shared a story about doing that, right? Where you can be in the midst and experiencing all of the anger and anguish and sadness of even a breakup, which is helping you get really clear about what you don't want. And in that emotion, you can begin to write, okay, I know what I want. I know how I want this person to show up. I know what words I want this person to say. I know how I want to feel when I'm in relationship with this person, when we're hanging out. I know the things that I want to do. I know the things that I want to say. But you're pivoting, and what begins to happen is, as you pivot by law, now the universe is responding to that vibration that you're offering, and so then you must attract things that reflect that. You're also then moving your emotion out of the fear, out of the anxiety, out of the not enough, out of the anger, back to a state of all is well. Again, it doesn't have to be excitement. That would be crazy. It's impossible to go straight from despair to through the moon crazy excitement. That's impossible. Please don't ever try to do that. Because you won't succeed. And then you'll be like, oh, this stuff doesn't work. Right? Or there's something wrong with me. I know I'm depressed right now, but I should be overjoyed. No. It's impossible. But it is possible to incrementally move from depression back to joy. And so here's the last process. Well, actually, let me share this one just because it's a favorite. You can do the book of positive aspects, and I do this one almost daily, where every day you pick three things that you want to just write what you like about it, what you love about it, and what are its positive aspects. And one thing that I do, the way I use this tool, I take something that I'm having issues with, and I make that one of the three things. I take two things that are just, as soon as I think about them, I can always just write good things and what I love about it and what I like about it, because it just immediately brings that vibration. It puts me in that beautiful emotion, and I'm in alignment. And now I need to write about the thing that I don't always feel so good about. But because I'm in that vibration, I can start to see even the smallest things, what those things are that I like about something that I'm having trouble with, or what I love about something that isn't always feeling good every day. And you only have to write one page, right? You do that, you turn the page, you go to the next subject. Doing that every morning, one, it starts your day in a certain place, which is why I love it, so that it minimizes the triggers of the day, because I've established the day in a certain way. But you can also do this in the moment. And sometimes I joke, if I start to have an issue or something's coming up, I'll say to Pastor, oh, I need to write a positive aspect about it. And so I know the next morning that's one of the subjects that I got to put in there, right? But here's the last thing I'm going to leave you with. And this is about moving up the emotional scale. Abraham says something that I think is very interesting. What I always say here is that many times when we're praying, if we're praying for a house, many times we're focused on that thing, but in truth, there's a vibrational equivalent. So I always say, look for the thing under the thing, right? The reason you want a home is because of the safety and the security and the comfort that it represents, right? That's really what we want. But we call it a house, so we put all of that meaning on that building that can be destroyed, right? So we recognize it's not really the thing, but there's a feeling, there's an experience that we're after. And so when we understand that, what Abraham offers us is to look at that. When we're in an experience about something, what is the feeling that we're actually after? And so in asking it as given in this process, Abraham offers, for instance, if we're experiencing, oh, I don't have enough money, really what the feeling is a feeling of insecurity. So you recognize you want to move from this feeling of feeling insecure and not feeling safe to a place of safety and a place of security. That's the movement that you're making. It's not about, I need more dollars in my bank. Why? And we know that to be true. There are people that have millions upon millions of dollars and they don't feel secure or safe. And so they're always out there trying to still get, because they think that, oh, if I just get, $500,000 more, then I'll feel safe. And then they realize that's not the number. And they realize that's not the number. Right? And we've all done that in our lives, right? It doesn't have to be millions of dollars. In your lifetime, you've made more money than from the time you first got here on the planet. But have you still felt like you need more security? Right. So that means that it's not about the external thing, but it's about the internal work. Right? So not enough money is really about moving from this feeling of insecurity to safety. Or sickness. Sickness, in this example, Abraham is saying that it's about moving from fear to confidence. Well, why? Because are you even sure that you can be healed? And so it keeps us in this place of not knowing if this thing can ever change. So we need to move our vibration from fear to confidence. To remembering and knowing your alignment. To remembering and knowing that health and wholeness is your default self. Fear to confidence. And finally, if you're wanting a relationship, the same thing. It's moving from loneliness to a feeling of excitement and satisfaction. Because that feeling of loneliness is a feeling of emptiness. And we think that once we're filled with a relationship, then we'll be satisfied. But we need to actually take that emotional journey before the thing shows up. Because otherwise, then that person becomes the representative of our safety and security and our satisfaction. And when they leave, what happens? Oh no, now I'm not safe again, and now I'm not satisfied. And so you can look at this emotional scale, and then what begins to happen is that's how you can then move from despair to joy. Not all at once, but you realize, okay, I feel desperate right now, and I want to move back to all is well. Well, what's the next best feeling above being desperate? And you can actually look at the scale to even find the words that feel good to you or that can help you. Okay, well, and actually this is a perfect example. I love to use this. If we look at the path of African Americans in this country, right? When we look at slavery, right? So there were many that felt hopeless during slavery, right? There were many that still believed that they could be free. We have that famous quote from Harriet Tubman that I could have freed more people if they knew they were slaves, right? And so in that moment, there was a lot of despair. Right? In that moment, there was a lot of apathy. There were a lot of people that felt like, we'll never be free. Right? It's never going to happen. Or you're just going to get killed. Well, my brother, he tried to run away, and they killed him. Or he tried to run away and they cut off his foot. Right? All of these things. And so there was that level of apathy and despair. But what began to happen was, because the truth of our being is always the truth of our being, it has to rise up. And so as a people, we began to see many people first move out of apathy to depression. Depression is actually a better feeling than complete apathy. Apathy, there's no movement, nothing. Depression, you're actually responding to something, some kind of event, right? And then out of depression, what happened? Anger. You got to get mad about this thing. Like, why in the hell did I allow this thing for so long? I'm a worthy being. Yes. And then out of that, what came was pride. This is where we get to the point of the Black Power movement, right? That we moved up the scale from this apathy and depression to now black is beautiful. Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. This is the scale. This is what was happening, and we can see this across history. Now, if you study David Hawkins in Power versus Force, what you recognize is that pride, although helpful and beneficial as it relates to depression and apathy and despair, it will not serve you ultimately. Why? Because it leads to separation and factualism. Right? Because we recognize the oneness of all beings. We recognize that we are one human family. And so while it's important for us individually to understand and know our worthiness and celebrate our uniqueness and celebrate our hair and celebrate our skin tone, we know that this is just a reflection of the all that is. And so actually, out of pride, then we move to this place of oneness, which is the Christ mind. And when we move to that place, then we're truly living in full and complete alignment. Because we've now mastered the emotions like our elder brother Jesus did, according to the Palm Sunday story. So I encourage each and every one of you to choose one or more of these processes. If your meditation fell off, pick it back up, 5 minutes. That's all. Start there. If you've been doing 5 or 10, add another 5. Right? I encourage you to come and learn more about transcendental meditation next month. But the possibility that each and every one of us have is to make every day our Palm Sunday.
Yes.
That as we walk through life, all the time, the universe is singing Hosanna, Hosanna to us.
Yes.
As we walk through life, Plato calls the palms, he calls them the palms of wisdom of Dionysus. And so the palms of wisdom are always being waved for us because we are the wise beings, we are the Christ beings, we are the masterful beings, because no longer have we let the animals sit on our back. No longer have we let the donkey of fear and the donkey of emotion and truth, the ass of these things, let's call it what it is. No longer have we let these emotions carry us through, walk us through life. We're down on all fours. See, that's desperation, that's depression, that's apathy right there. You're on all fours and this emotion is controlling you. But we get back in our right minds. And we call for a donkey, just as Jesus said to his disciples, go and get me a donkey. Because I want to walk into Jerusalem, into this place of peace. I want to walk into it triumphantly. The master of my life, the master of my destiny. That is the truth of our life. And so on that, I encourage everybody to stand. Today is our Palm Sunday. We hear the voices of the crowd. We hear the cheer. We see and can feel the waves of the palms being waved for us because we are now masters. We realize and recognize and we forgive ourselves right now. We set ourselves free for the moments that we walk through life on all fours, allowing our emotions to dictate who and what we are. We forgive ourselves, we set ourselves free because now we know that our emotions are simply a communicator. It's part of our guidance system as Abraham teaches us. And we recognize that our guidance system is always showing us whether we're in alignment or out of alignment with what our source, with what our highest self, with our greatest self, our capital S self knows to be true. I am so grateful and thankful to remember and know that I am not just this physical body. So grateful and thankful to know that these physical beings, as my brothers and sisters that are here, as marvelous and beautiful and powerful and amazing as they are on this physical plane, there is something greater, there is something larger, there is something more expansive about them that is also in operation. We put our hands back on the controls and play this game of life. I am so grateful and thankful for the symbols, for the symbol embodied in our elder brother Jesus of how we can walk through life masterfully, elegantly, easily, and effortlessly. I am so grateful for these stories of Dionysus, these stories of Attis and Mithras, these stories of Osiris, which are reminding us over and over again that we have the power, possibility, and probability to overcome our lower nature. And so today we make a choice. We make a choice to let go and take our hand off of the trigger. But we make a choice to be an example and a trigger of light. That when someone speaks to us, it triggers light and love to show up. That when someone comes into our presence, it triggers abundance and prosperity and more than enough. When someone comes into our presence, it triggers healing. When someone comes into our presence, it triggers alignment. When someone comes into our presence, it triggers oneness. Because we know who we are and we know whose we are. I release this prayer with much joy, much gratitude, much thanksgiving. And together we lift up our voices and we say amen.
Amen.
Ashe.
Ashe.
So it is.
And so it is.